Today, we're looking at Ultros, a new and interesting addition to the Metroidvania genre that had me hooked ever since playing the demo a few months ago, and even if I had not been lucky enough to get a press key, it would have been one of my guaranteed pickups this year. So the question becomes, did the full game live up to my expectations after the stellar demo? And the short answer is, well, yes, mostly. There are a few things I'd like to nitpick about, and there are a handful of questionable design decisions at specific points, especially with the flying skill and some of the things needed to get to the good ending. But overall, this is still a game I plan to return to, explore, and enjoy, even after the review is over, and can wholeheartedly support getting if you own a controller at least. That said, most of you regulars don't come to Patreon or YouTube for the quick overview, so let's dive into the pros and cons of this game, and even though part of the review conditions mean I can't show the final area or the final boss, there will absolutely be some dancing around story spoilers simply because of how ingrained it is with the mechanics, especially since I wager, at least for most people, you'll actually beat the game in half the time it takes you to complete the game. And while in the press material they sent, it says that it should take 15 to 20 hours to reach that first ending, if I had done less faffing about trying for that good ending, I probably would have reached the credits themselves within about 8 to 10 hours, instead of going for about 12 hours while testing out some of the mechanics that will be needed for getting towards the more completionist ending, which, all things considered, will take me much closer to the estimate they gave thanks to the plant mechanic and a few of the fiddly bits we'll get into in the gripe section. This aspect of beating the game and half the time to complete it admittedly may seem confusing, but it's tied to the fact that Ultros combines not only core Metroidvania features of exploration, platforming, and unlocks, but also roguelite time loop mechanics that have an interesting influence on the game world, and that can be continued even after reaching the point where you can go to the game's credits. In fact, you don't get the tools to manually force a loop until you reach the point where you can get to the credits. The other mechanic, and yes, it's tied to the time loops, is the seed mechanic, and I honestly find extremely interesting most of the time, though there are a few frustrations. That said, with a really cool visual aesthetic that is actually surprisingly easy to read, and the music that frankly sits in my top 10 of the past 5 years, spending more time messing with the plants in-game is something I'm actually fine with, especially since I'm literally listening to the game's music while writing this review. How all these mechanics tie into the story though is that you are on a ship practically built out of living materials from the feel of things, with plants and their seeds scattered throughout it, with inhabitants of each section having stories and lore tied to them that you can find scattered about. And as you plant these seeds, or even just leave plants that are already there alone, you'll progress the story and loop time, and the plants will spread loop to loop. So that basic plant you put in place earlier will now be a full-blown tree you can climb on. That moss, it'll reach twice as far. That piranha plant, well, it'll just be a bit of a butthead still. There are some plants that take one cycle to reach full growth, while others can take multiple loops or maybe even require some coaxing through special abilities you unlock. The first few loops will pretty much have this in the most basic forms and serve as a bit of a tutorial despite taking about a third of the time necessary to beat the story proper, with the initial loop setting up the basic movement, combat, skill tree, and foundational story beats, in addition to giving you access to an item that will serve as your ability tool for core Metroidvania features, while that skill tree is mostly focused on more meta progression style effects for those familiar with roguelites. Your second and third loops offer a little bit of flexibility, introducing ways to lock in your skills in the skill tree, as well as introducing a few aspects of your tools, and giving you access to the first hint of the depth of the plant system beyond just putting seeds in the ground. You'll also get one ability from the tool that frankly frustrated me, but was necessary to use, and that was the flight mechanic. Frankly, while the game plays really well in most situations as long as you have a controller, the flight mechanic resulted in the vast majority of my swearing while playing the game. This is because it works on an almost dragging mechanic rather than what you'd expect from flight. So steering wrong, even just a little bit, can result in you bouncing around like a rubber ball shot out of a cannon. This, combined with the invisible barriers, such as waterfalls where you can only go up so far on it, or weirdly placed enemies, made it fairly frustrating to use in certain areas. Thankfully though, if all you're wanting to do is get to the credits and don't want to worry about going for the completionist ending or gathering all the secrets, you will only need to interact with the frustrating aspect of this ability on a very few select occasions, namely a certain industrial area that you won't see before your fourth loop. The other major mechanic is the plant system, which you do get modifiers to your tool to help with as you progress, though you only unlock all the abilities once you've pretty much reached the end of the core story and handled all the MacGuffins, since they are your ability unlock points. Starting out, it's simple: put plant in ground, it grows a certain distance, and you loop. It finishes growing, or continues in the case of certain plants. As you progress though, you'll gain the ability to chop plants, dig up seeds, splice plants together, and even lure plants to go in certain directions. Not to mention, you'll unlock knowledge about how to make plants grow without looping, and even eventually a way to get deeper analysis on the plants and even enemies you encounter. These will be important since, as you may have noticed by how I've been talking about ending versus completion, plants are important for another feature beyond just solving puzzles and making big tree trunks. They also spawn flowers that you can use to connect the living network of the ship back together. Now, for the most part, this is a really cool idea, and by pursuing the connecting of these flowers, you unlock some cool shifts in the story, and even get new and different interactions with a few of the sentient inhabitants of the world as you progress, in this practically second arc to the story. There is a problem though. To get enough flowers to spawn in the right places, you need to organize the plants properly, otherwise the tethers won't reach. This is a fine mechanic and concept, but then you have to consider you can plant any plant in any fertile spot and have it grow. And usually it's pretty apparent what plant should go where, to do what, but other times I would plant what I thought goes there, and it would basically tell me hell no by refusing to spawn a single flower across multiple screen spans of a certain plant. While other times I could plant one that felt like it didn't belong, and I'd have a tree covered in connection flowers. So the major reason I didn't finish the completionist ending before writing this and opted to just do it for a few of the sleepers just to try out the mechanics of it was because of this odd nature of feeling like I was trying to guess what the developers were wanting rather than solving the puzzle proper. Well, that and the flying got frustrating at times too. I will likely go back and get the good ending to feed my curiosity though, since the game didn't alienate me for it. It just felt like I was spinning my wheels unnecessarily, and I had a deadline to keep for my weekly reviews, which you're watching right now. So I wanted to experience the rest of the core game before really diving deep into the 100%ing space that likely won't impact most players' experiences. That said, there is a lot you can connect to these plant networks. I actually went out of my way to solve one of the branches of the game explicitly with the network in tow to see what would happen. And yes, you can connect the sleepers and even their guardians, while connecting them immediately after. In fact, it even got me out of a few fights by doing so. The rest of the mechanics are what I'd consider more minor mechanics. Obviously, this has the basic functionality of a sword-based Metroidvania: double jumps, sword slashes, dodges, counters, etc. Though it does something odd that is going to either be a you love it moment or a you hate it moment, and that is how you manipulate enemy drops. Every enemy has an item drop, though how you kill them determines just what you will get and how nutritious it will be. If you use a nice variety of attacks, counters, and juggles, you can get a pristine monster part, which will heal a lot and give you way more nutrients. If you just hammer the attack button, you'll get battered parts, or even worse, just mashed up organs not even fit for a stew, which gives less healing and less nutrients respectively. Though you also can get fruit from plants that do much the same, and they all seem to be solid healing and nutrients in and of themselves. This is weirdly more important for your first few loops, since you need to unlock your skill tree each time, and only have a few items that can lock in a skill between loops, so it will take more nutrition to reach and unlock more skills. As you get further in, you'll usually have a good portion of your tree locked in, and only have to unlock a few, so doing complicated kills becomes significantly less important. Though admittedly, on your second or third loop, you actually have a character that will teach you how to hunt enemies properly. The other thing about enemy monsters, and this is actually taught to you quite a bit later in the game, is that a lot of them like the food as well. So feeding them can make them fall in love with you, which means they won't attack, and some of them can even fertilize the ground when fed as well. Now, of course, being a standard Metroidvania at its core, there are also boss fights, and for the most part they follow relatively predictable Metroidvania boss patterns, albeit skinned in Ultros' trippy art style. This does tend to limit their difficulty potential a bit, with fairly projected attacks, fairly predictable attack pattern evolutions as they take damage, and by the time you reach them, you will have gotten practice with the tools you need to beat them in a normal fight. And it's probably a good thing that these bosses are straightforward, since they will respawn every loop. So if you're doing any backtracking for secrets, you may end up fighting them a few times. Though if you read the hidden achievements in the game, you'll see there are other reasons they respawn as well, so keep that in mind if you're wanting to go for a 100% run. Thankfully though, the game does not act bad to you for not going completionist, since the proverbial bad ending is more of a you did what you could style ending, rather than mocking or degrading like some games that have multiple endings as a feature. This is a welcoming distinction, and it fits the overall feel of the game as an accessible Metroidvania that new and old players of the genre can enjoy. This more gentle bad ending and the fact that you can return to the save file to continue on towards completion actually makes it feel like that first ending is just the halfway point of the title, with the more roguelite styled pursuit of the good ending being the second half. Since you already have the lay of the land, all you have left is to loop and find the secrets, complete the challenges of the connecting the network, and finding the remaining upgrades for your tool, which, yes, your various tool effects do have upgrades hidden in different secret areas around the map. My favorite one being the one that turns your saw from an agent of chaos and destruction bouncing everywhere into a more finely tuned and aimed pruner of plants. Now, to pursue all these secrets and upgrades, the map will come in handy, and for the most part, compared to a lot of the other Metroidvania maps I've had to deal with lately, this one was a breath of fresh air, with a lot of information present after you find them, such as boss locations, sleeper locations, etc., as well as a nice indicator when there's a main path you have just not explored with a pink halo around the edge, though you still need to look around a bit for the hidden paths because they are not marked. There could be some improvements to it though, namely I hope in the future patches that they'll add skills to unlock showing basically fertile spots on the map rather than just plants, as well as a skill to show known item locations, namely unplanted seeds and food you might have failed to pick up. This would make the living network portion of the game focus a lot more on the puzzle aspect and feel a bit less laborious when trying to gather the seeds you want to plant in a specific loop. And of course, manual markers would always be welcome, but if they added those two options, I honestly don't think I'd feel a need for any manual markers for other features, since most of the key points are already marked. The only reason left for custom markers would be as notes for yourself between sessions. Probably the last thing is accessibility options, and while this might be due to the little bit of a troll in the back of my mind wanting to poke fun at a toxic post I saw, it is still an important discussion because Ultros has accessibility options, both for difficulty as well as for visual effects, so a big thumbs up there, and I will always support stuff like that if a developer wants to expand their audience and let more people enjoy their title. I think the only thing missing for accessibility though is that it lacks key rebinding for controllers as of writing this review, though I would not be surprised if they eventually add it, since the studio does seem forward-thinking and they do have rebinding for keyboard already. The main reason for controller rebinding would be to give players basically more options for interface, and while Steam does have tools for this, native in-game options will always be better for usability. So overall, I enjoyed my time with Ultros, and will enjoy going back to it on my own time to go after that 100% completion of the living network and digging up various secrets of my own, and even exploring a bit more in the space sections when possible. And I can say if you enjoy easy to moderate difficulty Metroidvanias with a handful of puzzle elements that are dripping with style, you'll like Ultros too. And if you want to support the channel and get these reviews without ads for free, check out the Patreon down below.